The moment I realized I was utterly alone at Holloway Station, my breath began to crystallize in front of me, though the digital thermostat above the bench read 68 degrees. Something about this place felt wrong, had always felt wrong if I'm being honest. But tonight, the wrongness had teeth. My name is Elliot Mercer, and I've passed through this underground station countless times during my years as a night shift orderly at St. Ambrose Hospital. But I've never missed my 2:15 train before. I've never had to wait here watching the ceiling-mounted fluorescents pulse in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, listening to the tunnels whisper with sounds that couldn't possibly be there, and I've certainly never felt like the darkness was watching me back. My phone displayed 3:33 a.m., the screen, an island of light in the subterranean gloom. The next train wouldn't arrive until 4:47 a.m., a peculiar schedule gap that I'd never questioned until now. Holloway Station was among the oldest in the city, its curved tiled walls reminiscent of arteries beneath the skin of the metropolis. During rush hour, business people and commuters would flood through like hurried corpuscles, but at this hour, the platform stood empty, or it should have been empty. The first anomaly was subtle, my footsteps. Each time I stopped walking, the echo continued for 2 more steps. I tested this repeatedly, moving and halting at random intervals, and each time the phantom steps followed mine with precise mimicry before fading. I tried to dismiss it as some acoustic peculiarity of the century-old tunnel, but the explanation felt thin and insufficient. I checked my watch, a habit formed over years of punching in and out at precisely recorded times. The analog face showed 3:33, the second hand trembling but stationary. I tapped the glass, suspecting the battery had failed, and glanced at my phone again, 3:33 a.m., still. I refreshed the screen. The time remained unchanged, despite the fact that I'd been standing there for what must have been minutes. I looked up at the station's antique clock, its hands gliding smoothly, showing 3:46. At least something was still measuring the progression of time correctly. The departure board above the platform flickered, the familiar scrolling text of arrivals and departures briefly dissolving into incomprehensible symbols. Jagged lines and curves that resembled letters from no alphabet that I recognized. I blinked and the standard display returned. A cold current of air swept across the platform, carrying a scent that didn't belong. Pipe tobacco, coal smoke, and something medicinal that reminded me of the hospital's oldest wing. The overhead lights dimmed momentarily, and when they brightened again, I noticed something on the bench across the platform. A glove. Woman's burgundy leather, vintage, with small pearl buttons at the wrist. It hadn't been there moments before. I was certain of that. I crossed the platform, footsteps echoing in that unsettling, delayed pattern. When I reached the glove and cautiously lifted it, the leather was warm to the touch, as if it had just been removed from someone's hand. I dropped it immediately. The sound of my phone rattling against the tiled floor echoed down the tunnel. I must have inadvertently pulled it from my pocket with the sudden movement of my hand. As I bent to retrieve it, I became aware of a vibration traveling through the ground beneath my feet. Not the familiar rumble of an approaching train, but something more irregular, like a massive object being dragged across the tracks. I checked the departure board again. Nothing scheduled, but the vibration intensified and a warm gust of air pushed from the northern tunnel, carrying with it the unmistakable metallic screech of brakes. A train was coming, one that shouldn't exist. The headlights appeared first, weaker than normal, with a yellowish tint rather than the harsh white LEDs of modern engines. The train that emerged was from another era, weathered metal with riveted panels, windows clouded with age, and its entire form somehow less substantial than it should be. It was like watching an old photograph move. It didn't stop, merely slowed to a crawl as it passed through the station. Through the windows, I caught a glimpse of passengers seated in compartments that hadn't been used on city trains for decades. A woman in a pillbox hat reading a newspaper, a man in what appeared to be a bowler hat and high collar, a child in a sailor suit, face pressed against the glass. None looked outward, none except an elderly woman in the third car who turned toward the window as if sensing my presence. She wore round spectacles, her silver hair pulled back severely, her expression one of scholarly intensity. She lifted her hand, pale, long-fingered, and pressed it against the glass, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. And then she was gone, the train continuing its silent procession through the station. The last car had no rear lights, and as it vanished into the southern tunnel, I glimpsed something impossible. The tunnel beyond appeared different, wider, with architectural elements I'd never noticed before, arches within arches, receding into darkness. Then it was gone, and I was alone again. The digital clock on my phone still read 3:33 a.m. I decided it was time to leave. I'd walk home if necessary, but as I approached the escalators, I realized they had stopped running. The emergency exit door felt unnaturally cold, the metal handle radiating a chill that burned my palm when I tried to turn it. It was locked. Or perhaps sealed would be a more accurate term. I was trapped in Holloway Station with its echoing footsteps and broken time. "Waiting for the Holloway special, are we?" The voice, cultured but weathered, came from behind me. I turned to find an elderly man standing near the service corridor entrance. He wore an outdated uniform, navy with brass buttons, a station master's cap perched on his white hair. In his hand, he carried a lantern of antique design, its flame casting shadows that seemed to move independently of its bearer. "I'm waiting for the 447, I replied, relief at seeing another person overwhelming my unease at his sudden appearance. He removed a tarnished pocket watch from his vest, consulted it with a frown. "The 447 hasn't run since the collapse, son." "What collapse?" His eyes, pale blue and somehow both youthful and ancient, assessed me with clinical detachment. "You're on the wrong platform for the living, son," he said, his tone matter of fact. Then he turned and walked back toward the service corridor. "Wait," I called, pursuing him. "What do you mean? What's happening here?" He disappeared around a corner. When I reached the same spot seconds later, the corridor stretched empty before me, the overhead fixtures casting pools of light on the concrete that looked freshly poured, not weathered by decades of use. The scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air. When I returned to the platform, the atmosphere had changed. The temperature had dropped further, my breath now clearly visible. The burgundy glove had vanished from the bench area where I'd left it, and I was no longer alone. They materialized gradually like photographs developing in chemical baths, first as indistinct shapes in my peripheral vision, then gaining substance when observed directly. A young woman in a navy dress and white collar clutching an envelope with a red seal. A businessman with sideburns and a wide-lapelled suit, reading from a folded newspaper. A child, perhaps 7 years old, holding a doll with a cracked porcelain face. None acknowledged me. They paced in strange, precise patterns, checking watches, peering down the tunnel, their movements containing an odd mechanical quality, as if they were actors who had rehearsed these simple actions to perform. I approached the businessman, intending to speak, to demand explanation. As I drew near, I noticed his newspaper was dated September 17th, 1972. Then I saw what the angle of his hat had concealed. A portion of his skull was crushed inward, the injury bloodless but unmistakably fatal. As I recoiled, his form dissolved into mist, reforming several yards away, resuming his rehearsed routine of checking his watch and peering down the tunnel. The young woman with the envelope was closer now. The seal on her telegram was wet, but not with red wax as I'd first thought, with blood that seeped from beneath her fingernails. The child's sailor suit was scorched, the back reduced to carbon. They were all dead, had been for years, perhaps decades, and they were waiting, just as I was. The station clock remained frozen at 3:33, but my perception of time began to distort. I couldn't say if I'd been in the station for hours or minutes. The lights continued their rhythmic pulsing, brightening and dimming in patterns that now seemed almost recognizable, like Morse code in an unfamiliar language. I sat on a bench as far from the phantoms as possible. Though they took no note of me, the wooden slats were uncomfortable, and as I shifted position, I felt something wedged between them. Reaching down, my fingers closed around a leather binding, a journal, smallish, its cover worn smooth, its pages yellowed and brittle. I opened to the first page and read, 12 September 1952, the temporal anomalies at Holloway Station persist despite attempts to resolve them through conventional scientific means. Following the collapse of Tunnel B and the tragic loss of 17 souls, the breach has only widened. Moments from different times now bleed together in this place. I believe I'm beginning to understand the mechanism, if not the cause. Dr. Alexandra Winters, Department of Theoretical Physics. I flipped through the journal, scanning entries that documented phenomena identical to what I was experiencing. Dr. Winters described the station as existing at a crossroads of time where moments from its past and future overlapped unpredictably. She documented the ghostly passengers, the phantom train, the station master whom she identified as Harold Perkins, who died in a maintenance accident in 1926. Her final entry was dated October 3rd, 1952. I am now convinced that the phantom train is not a ghost or hallucination, but a physical manifestation traveling along temporal rather than merely spatial tracks. I believe it's possible to board this train. The station master has appeared to me again, suggesting I might find answers at the end of the line. Tonight, I will attempt to do precisely that. Tucked into the back cover was a yellowed newspaper clipping. It read, "Physicist vanishes from subway station. Dr. Alexandra Winters, 36, a physicist with the Ministry of Science, was reported missing yesterday after failing to return from what colleagues described as routine field observations at Holloway Station. Authorities have found no evidence of foul play. This marks the third disappearance connected to Holloway Station since the tragic tunnel collapse of August 17 claimed 17 lives. Construction on the replacement tunnel continues despite concerns from local residents. The rest of the clipping was torn away. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The implications were too vast, too terrible to fully comprehend. If what Dr. Winters theorized was correct, then Holloway Station existed in some kind of temporal breach, where different moments in its history coexisted simultaneously, and I was trapped there, just as she had been. A loud, prolonged screeching of metal announced the arrival of another unscheduled train. Unlike the previous Phantom, this one slowed to a complete stop, its doors sliding open with a pneumatic sigh to reveal a pitch-black interior. The ghostly passengers all turned toward it with sudden purpose, their mechanical movements gaining fluidity, intent. They began to move toward the open doors. "Everyone here is waiting for something, Mr. Mercer," said a voice beside me. The station master had returned, his lantern casting the strange independent light. "Some wait for answers, some absolution. What are you waiting for?" I had never told him my name. "How do you know who I am?" I asked. "You wear your hospital ID around your neck," he replied with a thin smile. "But I would have known you anyway. We get all kinds here, but there's a look to those who arrive by accident rather than design, a confusion in their eyes." From within the train, a voice called out, a woman's voice, clear and authoritative. "Mr. Mercer, you must hurry before the window closes." The speaker stood in the doorway of the nearest car, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair pulled back from a high forehead. She wore a tweed skirt and jacket that might have been fashionable in the early 1950s. What struck me most was how her appearance seemed to flicker between that of a young woman and an elderly one, as if two images were being rapidly alternated. "Dr. Winters?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "There isn't time to explain," she called. "Either board now or remain forever. The breach is cycling." The station began to warp around me, the architecture bending in impossible ways. Tiles rippled like water. The ceiling stretched upward into infinity. The floor beneath my feet became transparent, revealing not earth and foundation, but a vast, star-filled void. "Make your choice," the station master said, his form now seemingly composed more of shadow than substance. "But make it quickly." "No," I said, stepping back from the edge of the platform. "This isn't real. None of this is real." Dr. Winters' expression shifted from urgency to resignation. "As you wish, Mr. Mercer. Not everyone is meant to ride these rails." The doors of the phantom train closed with a sighing hiss. The ghastly passengers stared out through the windows, their faces pressed against the glass. The child with the doll waved a small, pale hand. The businessman nodded once solemnly. The young woman with the telegram wrote something on its back and held it up for me to see. "Wait for the next one," it said. Then the train began to move, accelerating swiftly into the darkness of the tunnel. "You've made your choice," the station master said. "Now we'll see if it was wise." The station around me began to distort violently. The tiled walls rippled like fabric in a strong wind. The ceiling stretched upward, then compressed, the distance between floor and roof accordioning in nauseating waves. The lights brightening to blinding intensity and then dimmed to a near darkness in rapid succession. I covered my eyes, feeling as if my skull might split from the impossible geometries forming around me. The ground beneath my feet seemed to drop away, leaving me suspended in a void that was neither up nor down, here nor there. Then, with a sound like a massive rubber band snapping, everything stopped. I opened my eyes to find myself on a modern, well-lit platform. The digital departure board displayed normal arrivals and departures. The station clock showed 4:46 a.m. My watch was functioning again. My phone displayed the correct time and had full signal. Around me, a handful of early morning commuters waited drowsily for the first trains of the day. Normal people, living people. The 4:47 train arrived precisely on schedule, its doors opening with the familiar automated announcement. I boarded in a daze, finding a seat at the window, half convinced I had fallen asleep on the platform and dreamed the entire experience. But as I settled in, I felt something in my pocket. Dr. Winter's journal. When I withdrew it, the aged leather felt solid and real beneath my fingers. I opened it with trembling hands, finding that all the pages were now blank except for the final one. There, in my own handwriting, was a single line that I had no memory of writing. It said, "Some trains are not meant to be taken." I closed the journal, suddenly aware of how cold the air had become inside the carriage. As the train pulled away from Holloway Station, I gazed out the window, watching the platform recede into the distance. In a reflection on the glass, I saw the station master standing directly behind my seat, his lantern casting that strange, independent light. But when I turned, there was only an empty aisle. For the remainder of the journey home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were traveling through tunnels that shouldn't exist, deeper and older than the ones marked on transit maps. Occasionally, through the windows, I glimpsed platforms that belonged to different eras, populated by passengers who did not move quite like the living people. In the glass reflection, the station master remained behind me, his lips forming words I could not hear but somehow understood. "The Holloway Special runs on schedule, Mr. Mercer. It will return for you. It always returns." Epilogue. For David, who missed his train one night in October, if you're still riding those rails, write when you can. Some of us are still waiting at the station. Thanks for listening to my Dark Veil tale. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me grow this channel so I can make more content for your enjoyment. Also, check out the linked video for another creeper-style story from Dark Veil Tales.